I paid $50 for an old wooden desk because I needed something cheap for my home office. 3 weeks later, that desk helped police solve a murder that had been hidden for more than 20 years. But the strangest part was not what I found inside it. The strangest part was that someone came looking for it before I even understood what I had. I found the desk at a small estate sale on the edge of town. It was standing alone inside a nearly empty garage. The wood was dark and scratched, and one of the handles was missing. It looked too heavy to move, and honestly, even the kind of furniture I normally liked. But it was solid, and I thought I could restore it. The man running the sale introduced himself as Michael. He said the desk had belonged to an older family friend named Robert, who had recently died. Most of Robert's belongings had already been sold or thrown away. Michael wanted $50 for the desk. I offered him $40. He looked at it for several seconds, then agreed. While we were loading it into my truck, he suddenly asked me what I planned to do with it. I said I would clean it and use it for work. He nodded, but did not look relieved. Before I left, he put his hand on the side of the desk and said Robert never allowed anyone to open the bottom right drawer. Then he laughed awkwardly and said the old man had probably hidden unpaid bills inside. At the time, I thought it was just a strange story people tell about dead relatives. I drove home and placed the desk in my spare bedroom. The bottom right drawer was locked, but Michael had given me a ring of old keys. None of them worked. I pulled the handle harder, but the drawer barely moved. I assumed the wood had swollen over the years. The next morning, I removed the drawer above it to see whether something was blocking the mechanism. That was when I noticed the inside of the desk was deeper than it should have been. There were nearly 4 inches of empty space behind the drawer. I reached into the opening and felt a smooth wooden panel. The rest of the wood inside the desk was rough and unfinished. This panel was polished. I pressed it and heard a quiet click. The locked drawer moved forward by itself. There had never been a lock. It was connected to a hidden release. Inside, I found an old fountain pen, several empty envelopes, and a faded photograph. The photograph showed 2 men standing in front of a large office building. The older man wore an expensive suit. The younger man beside him looked about 19. On the back, someone had written June 1998, the last good day. There were no names. I checked the envelopes, but they were empty. The pen did not work. I thought that was all the drawer contained. Then I noticed a small brass screw near the back corner. When I removed it, the entire bottom panel lifted. Underneath was a notebook wrapped in dark cloth. The notebook was old but carefully protected. On the first page, there was only one sentence. If you are reading this, then I was right not to trust them. I should have stopped reading. It was clearly private, and whoever had hidden it did not want it found. But I told myself the owner was probably dead, and the notebook might explain why the desk had been kept locked for so long. The first entries were ordinary. The writer described meetings, contracts, and disagreements with a business partner. His name was Daniel Mercer. He owned a construction company with a man named Richard Cole. They had started the company together when they were young, and over 2 decades had turned it into one of the largest developers in the area. Daniel also wrote about his wife Claire and their son Evan. At first, it felt like a record of his daily life. Then the entries changed. Daniel began writing about missing money. Small amounts had disappeared from company accounts. Then, larger transfers appeared behind false invoices and contracts with businesses that did not seem to exist. Daniel confronted Richard, but Richard blamed accountants and careless employees. Daniel did not believe him. He secretly hired an outside auditor. 2 weeks later, the auditor quit. According to Daniel, the man sounded frightened and refused to explain what he had found. The next entry contained only 6 words: "Someone knows what I am doing." After that, Daniel began recording everything: names, dates, account numbers, license plates, and meetings. Believed Richard was stealing from the company, but he also believed someone inside his own family was helping him. At first, Daniel suspected Claire. She had recently opened a separate bank account and had been meeting Richard without telling him. Daniel followed her one evening. He watched her enter a restaurant through a side door. Richard arrived 10 minutes later. They stayed inside for nearly 2 hours. Daniel did not confront them. He continued watching. A week later, he found company documents hidden in Claire's bedroom. Several contained Daniel's signature. The signatures looked real, but Daniel knew he had never signed them. He believed Richard and Claire were preparing to transfer his shares in the company. The next pages became increasingly paranoid. Daniel said cars followed him home. His private office was entered during the night, but nothing was stolen. The combination on his safe was changed. 3 days later, someone opened it again. Clicking sounds. He no longer trusted the police because Richard had close relationships with several local officials. Daniel wrote that he had collected enough evidence to destroy both Richard and Claire. He placed the original documents somewhere outside the company. He planned to meet a federal investigator on October 27, 1999. Then, several pages had been torn out. The next entry was written so quickly that some words were almost unreadable. Daniel said his son Evan had discovered something. Evan had overheard a conversation and wanted money to leave town. Daniel wrote that his own son was terrified. The final entry was dated October 25th, 2 days before the planned meeting. They know where I am going. If I disappear, do not believe the story they tell. Everything after that was blank. I searched Daniel Mercer's name on my phone. The first article made my stomach tighten. Prominent businessman disappears after financial scandal. Daniel Mercer had vanished in October 1999. Millions of dollars had disappeared from his company. Police believed Daniel had transferred the money into foreign accounts and fled the country. His car was found at the airport. His passport and several bags were missing from his home. Richard Cole told reporters that Daniel had been under enormous pressure and had made reckless financial decisions. Claire said her husband had become paranoid in the months before his disappearance. She believed he had planned to abandon the family. No one had seen Daniel since. The case had never been solved. After Daniel vanished, Richard became the sole owner of the company. Claire sold Daniel's shares and moved to another state. Evan disappeared from public records for several years, then returned and began working for Richard. Richard was now in his 70s. His name appeared on hospitals, schools, and charity foundations. He was described everywhere as a respected businessman. Daniel's notebook told a completely different story. I called Michael immediately. I asked again where the desk had come from. He repeated that it had belonged to Robert. I asked how Robert had obtained it. Michael said he did not know. Then I told him I had found a hidden notebook. The line went silent. After several seconds, he asked what name was written inside. When I said Daniel Mercer, he hung up. 10 minutes later, he sent me a message. Destroy the notebook and forget you ever saw it. That was the moment the desk stopped feeling like an interesting discovery. I photographed every page. Then I hid the notebook inside a box in my bedroom closet. I returned to the desk and searched it again. If Daniel had hidden one thing, there might be something else. I checked every drawer and removed every panel. For almost an hour, I found nothing. Then I picked up the fountain pen. It was much heavier than a normal pen. The cap would not unscrew. When I pressed the metal clip, the center opened. Inside was a brass key wrapped in a narrow strip of paper. The paper contained 6 numbers and the name of an old bank downtown. The bank had closed more than 15 years earlier. Another bank now occupied the same building. I called and explained that I had found an old key. The employee asked for the number. She said the number did not belong to a standard safe deposit box. It came from an older private storage system used by law firms and businesses. Most of those boxes had been removed during renovations. Any remaining contents would require proof of ownership. I had no proof. All I had was a key hidden in a pen and a notebook written by a man who had disappeared. That evening, a black car parked across the street from my house. It remained there for nearly an hour. I could not see the driver. When I stepped outside, the headlights came on. The car slowly drove away. My back door was unlocked. I was certain I had locked it. Nothing seemed to be missing. Then I entered the spare bedroom. Every drawer had been removed from the desk. The wooden panels were lying on the floor. Someone had searched it. The notebook was still inside my closet. The key was still in my pocket. I called the police, but they found no broken windows and no clear fingerprints. The officer suggested I might have forgotten to lock the door. I did not tell him about Daniel. That afternoon, Michael finally called me back. His voice was shaking. He admitted Robert had not been his uncle. Robert had been a close friend of Michael's father. After Robert died, Michael was asked to clear out his storage unit. The desk had been covered with blankets at the back. Michael wanted the unit emptied and sold it without knowing its history. I asked who Robert really was. Michael said Robert Hayes had worked as Daniel Mercer's personal driver. He had driven Daniel to meetings for almost 10 years. 2 days after Daniel disappeared, Robert suddenly quit his job and left town. Before Robert died, he told Michael's father that Daniel had never stolen the money. He also said keeping the desk had been the greatest mistake of his life. Michael gave me the name of Robert's daughter, Anna Hayes. I found her online and sent a short message. 20 minutes later, my phone rang. Before I could explain anything, Anna asked one question. "Did you find the notebook?" I asked how she knew it existed. Anna said that when she was 16, her father came home in the middle of the night with Daniel's desk in the back of a truck. Another man was with him. They carried the desk into the garage and covered it. Several days later, the same man returned. Anna heard them arguing. Her father said, "Daniel trusted you." The other man replied, "Daniel is gone, and you need to understand that." Anna had seen that man's face many times in newspapers after Daniel disappeared. Was Richard Cole. According to Anna, Richard personally helped Robert move the desk. That meant Richard knew the desk mattered. Maybe he knew Daniel had hidden evidence inside. Maybe he had spent more than 20 years wondering where it was. Anna said her father became a different person after Daniel vanished. He stopped sleeping. He checked the windows every night. He kept a weapon beside his bed. Whenever a dark car appeared outside, he closed every curtain in the house. Once Anna asked whether Daniel had really stolen the money. Robert told her Daniel had discovered who was stealing it. Then he refused to say anything more. Before ending the call, Anna begged me to destroy the notebook. I told her someone had already entered my house. She began crying. She said that was exactly how it had started with her father. First, a car outside, then strange calls, then someone inside the house. I asked whether she would help me open the box connected to the key. Anna refused, said her father had protected that secret for the rest of his life, and she wanted nothing to do with it. Then I read Daniel's final words to her. "If I disappear, do not believe the story they tell." Anna remained silent for a long time. Finally, she agreed to meet me at the bank the following morning. That night, I moved the notebook and key to a different location. At 2:13 in the morning, my phone rang. The number was hidden. I answered, but no one spoke. After several seconds, a man's voice said, "You bought something that does not belong to you." I asked who he was. He ignored the question. He told me to place the notebook inside the desk and leave the back door unlocked. If I did that, no one would be hurt. I said I had already given copies to the police. It was a lie. The man laughed quietly. Then he said, "No, you did not." The call ended. I did not sleep again that night. The next morning, Anna and I met outside the bank. She carried her father's death certificate and documents proving she was his daughter. The bank manager spent almost an hour checking the old records. Finally, he returned with an older employee. They had found the number. A private document box was still stored in a sealed section of the basement. The rental name was Robert Hayes. Robert had opened it 3 days before Daniel disappeared. Because Anna was his legal heir, the bank allowed her to access it. A security employee placed a long metal box on the table. Anna inserted the key. Her hands were shaking so badly that I helped her turn it. The lock opened. Inside were several envelopes, a sealed folder, and a cassette tape. There was also a handwritten letter addressed to Robert. Anna unfolded it. "Robert, if you are reading this, then something happened before I reached the investigator. Do not trust Richard. Do not trust Claire. Do not trust anyone from the company. Keep Evan safe. He knows more than they think. I am sorry for putting this on you. Daniel." Anna covered her mouth, opened the sealed folder. Inside were bank transfers, forged contracts, and records of companies connected to Richard. There was also a life insurance policy worth $5 million. It had been opened 4 months before Daniel disappeared. The beneficiary was Claire. Another document showed Claire transferred almost $2 million into one of Richard's companies 1 week after Daniel vanished. The cassette was marked October 25, 1999, the same date as Daniel's final notebook entry. The bank found an old tape player. When we pressed play, Daniel's voice filled the room. He explained how Richard and Claire had stolen money from the company. He described the forged documents and false accounts. Then he said Evan had overheard them planning something far worse. They were not only going to frame Daniel, they were planning to kill him. The recording ended with Daniel saying, "If I do not survive, then the truth is inside this box." Silent. Then someone knocked on the door. The bank manager opened it. A security guard whispered something into his ear. The manager turned toward us and said a man was downstairs asking about an old private box. He had shown identification. His name was Richard Cole. For several seconds, none of us moved. Richard Cole was downstairs. The same man Daniel had accused of stealing from him. The same man Anna had seen carrying the desk into her father's garage more than 20 years earlier. The same man who had built his reputation on the claim that Daniel was a thief. I asked the manager whether Richard knew we were there. He said Richard had asked whether anyone had recently accessed records connected to Robert Hayes. That meant he knew exactly what he was looking for. Anna wanted to leave through another exit. The manager locked the room and called the police. We placed every document back inside the metal box, except Daniel's letter and the cassette tape. I photographed each page as quickly as I could. Minutes later, we heard voices in the hallway. Richard was demanding to speak with the manager. He claimed the box contained company property that had been stolen from him. The manager refused to let him enter. He stopped sounding like a confused old businessman. He sounded angry. He said everyone in the room was making a serious mistake. Then the police arrived. Richard became calm again. When officers questioned him, he said he had recently learned that Robert might have stored old company records at the bank. He claimed he only wanted to recover them. He denied knowing anything about the desk or the notebook. Then he saw Anna. For the first time, his expression changed. He stared at her and quietly said, "You look like your father." Anna replied, "You are the reason he spent his life." Afraid, Richard smiled and said her father had always been unstable. The police collected the documents and the cassette. They also took Daniel's notebook after I brought them to the location where I had hidden it. The old disappearance case was reopened immediately. At first, the investigators treated the evidence cautiously. The notebook alone could not prove a murder. The cassette could have been staged. The documents needed to be authenticated. Richard had wealth, influence, and some of the best lawyers in the state. His attorneys released a statement saying Daniel had been involved in financial crimes and had created false evidence to blame innocent people. Claire made a similar statement through her lawyer. She said Daniel had become mentally unstable before disappearing. She denied having a relationship with Richard. Then the first major confirmation came. Experts examined the bank records. The transfers were real. Several shell companies had received millions from Daniel's construction business. Those companies were secretly controlled by Richard through associates. The forged signatures matched documents used to transfer Daniel's ownership shares after his disappearance. The life insurance policy was also real. Claire had received the full payment 6 months after Daniel vanished. Investigators traced part of that money to Richard. The cassette recording was tested. The tape had been manufactured in the 1990s. There were no signs of digital editing. Several people who had known Daniel identified the voice. The police now had proof of fraud, but they still did not know what happened to Daniel. The answer depended on one person, his son, Evan. No one knew where he was. After Daniel disappeared, Evan briefly worked for Richard. Then he left the state and vanished from public records. Investigators searched old employment files, property records, and licenses. They eventually discovered that Evan had been living under a tunnel. Different last name. He worked as a mechanic in a small town, hundreds of miles away. When detectives approached him, he initially refused to speak. He said Daniel had stolen the money and abandoned the family. That was the story he had repeated for more than 20 years. Then they played his father's tape. According to one detective, Evan listened without moving. When Daniel said, "Keep Evan safe," he began crying. For the first time in more than 2 decades, Evan told the truth. On the night Daniel disappeared, Richard came to the Mercer home. Claire led him inside. Daniel and Richard argued inside the study. Evan listened from the top of the stairs. Richard demanded the original financial records. Daniel refused. Claire told Daniel everything would be easier if he cooperated. Daniel accused them of stealing from him and planning to destroy his name. Then Evan heard a crash. He ran downstairs. His father was lying unconscious beside the desk. There was blood near the back of his head. Richard told Evan that Daniel had attacked him and fallen. Claire ordered Evan to return upstairs. Evan refused. Richard grabbed him and said his father had stolen millions and would take the entire family down with him. Then another man entered through the back door. Evan recognized him as a senior employee from the construction company. The 2 men wrapped Daniel in a blanket and carried him into a car. Evan asked his mother where they were taking him. Claire said Daniel was leaving the country. She told Evan he would be arrested too if he spoke to anyone, because the missing money had passed through an account in his name. Evan had never opened that account. Richard and Claire had created it without his knowledge. The next morning, Daniel's car was found at the airport. His passport was gone. News reports said he had fled. Claire told Evan the story was over. But Evan knew his father had not walked out of the house. For weeks he expected Daniel to return. He never did. Evan tried to contact Robert because he knew his father trusted him. Before they could meet, a man followed Evan from work. That night, someone broke into his apartment. Nothing was stolen. Evan understood the warning. He left the state and changed his name. Years later, Richard found him and offered him money and a job. Richard said the past needed to stay buried. Evan accepted because he was afraid. He worked for the company briefly and saved enough money to disappear again. He had lived with the guilt ever since. Evan gave detectives one important detail. As Richard and the second man carried Daniel away, he heard them mention a construction site called Briar Hill. Briar Hill had been a large apartment project owned by Richard's company. Construction began days after Daniel disappeared. The site was completed the following year. Police searched old plans and aerial photographs. Most of the property was covered by buildings and parking areas, but one section, near the original equipment yard, had been sealed beneath a thick concrete foundation. According to company records, the concrete had been poured late at night after an alleged drainage problem. The order had been personally approved by Richard. Investigators obtained a warrant. Ground scanning equipment detected a space beneath the foundation. Workers cut through the concrete. Less than 6 feet below it, they found human remains wrapped in material similar to industrial construction sheeting. Dental records confirmed the remains belonged to Daniel Mercer. He had never reached the airport. He had never fled the country. He had been buried under one of his own construction projects. The medical examiner found damage to the back of his skull. The injury matched Evan's description of the blood near Daniel's head. Richard was arrested at his home. Claire was arrested the same afternoon. The second man Evan had seen was identified as Thomas Wade. He had worked as Richard's operations manager. Thomas had died several years earlier. Investigators searched archived company storage connected to Thomas. Inside one box, they discovered an old jacket sealed in plastic. A small blood stain remained near the sleeve. Modern DNA testing confirmed the blood belonged to Daniel. The case now had the notebook, the bank records, the cassette, Evan's testimony, and Daniel's remains, and physical evidence linking Richard's employee to the crime. But Richard still refused to confess. His lawyers argued that Daniel had been killed accidentally during a confrontation about the stolen money. They said Richard helped hide the body because he panicked. They claimed Claire knew nothing about the murder. Then investigators found something no one expected. One of the envelopes inside the bank box had remained sealed. It contained a letter Daniel had written to his attorney. Daniel described a meeting he secretly recorded between Claire and Richard. The recording itself was not inside the box, but Daniel wrote that he had hidden it in the only place Claire would never search: Evan's childhood room. Police contacted the current owners of the old Mercer house. The room had been renovated several times. Most of the original furniture was gone, but a built-in wooden shelf remained beside the window. Evan remembered that Daniel had constructed the shelf himself. Investigators removed it from the wall. Behind a narrow panel, they found a small audio recorder wrapped in plastic. The tape inside captured Claire and Richard speaking several weeks before Daniel vanished. Claire said Daniel was getting too close. Richard said they would make it appear that he had stolen the money and escaped. Claire asked what would happen if Daniel refused to leave. Richard answered, "Then he will not leave alive." The recording destroyed their defense. Claire could no longer claim she knew nothing. Richard could no longer describe the death as an accident. They had planned Daniel's disappearance before the night he died. The trial began almost 2 years after I bought the desk. The courtroom was full every day. Richard entered wearing expensive suits and showed almost no emotion. Claire avoided looking at Evan. Their lawyers attacked Daniel's character. They described the notebook as the writing of a paranoid man. They argued that Evan's memory had changed over time. They accused Robert of hiding evidence for personal gain. But every attack created another problem for them. If Daniel had been paranoid, then why were the bank transfers real? If Evan had invented the story, then how did he know where Daniel was buried? If Robert wanted money, then why had he hidden the evidence for the rest of his life? Anna testified about the night her father brought home the desk. She described Richard standing inside their garage. She repeated the words she had heard. "Daniel trusted you. Daniel is gone, and you need to understand that." For almost 6 hours, he described seeing his father on the floor. He described the threats. He described spending more than 20 years believing that speaking would destroy what remained of his life. Near the end, the prosecutor showed him the old photograph from the desk. Daniel stood in front of the company building with his hand on Evan's shoulder. Evan began crying. The prosecutor turned the photograph over. The faded message on the back had been restored by experts. It contained more than the line I had first noticed. June 1998. The last good day. For Evan. One day you will understand why I tried to protect you. Evan said he had never seen the photograph before. Daniel had hidden it with the notebook because he believed someone would eventually find both. Richard was convicted of murder, conspiracy, fraud, and evidence tampering. Claire was convicted of conspiracy, fraud, and helping conceal Daniel's death. Both received sentences that ensured they would spend the rest of their lives in prison. After the verdict, Evan remained seated inside the courtroom. Everyone else slowly left. I saw Anna sit beside him. Neither of them spoke. They were connected by two men who had spent their final years trying to protect the same truth. Daniel had hidden the evidence. Robert had protected it. Neither lived to see what happened. Several months later, Evan asked to meet me. We sat in a small cafe near the courthouse. He thanked me for finding the notebook. I told him I had only purchased an old desk. He said that was not true. Many people had owned, stored, or moved that desk. I was simply the first person who noticed that one drawer was deeper than it should have been. Evan told me something else I had not known. Robert had not hidden the desk only to protect the documents. He had been waiting for Evan. After Daniel disappeared, Robert tried several times to contact him. But Richard's men were watching both families. Robert believed giving Evan the desk would put him in danger, so he kept it hidden. Years passed, then decades. Robert eventually lost contact with Evan. By the time Robert died, he probably believed the truth would never come out. Anna received her father's letter from the bank. Evan kept Daniel's photograph and the original notebook. The police eventually returned the desk to me. I did not want it in my house. Every time I looked at it, I remembered the black car across the street and the voice on the phone. But throwing it away felt wrong. I offered it to Evan. He said he could not keep it. The desk contained the truth about his father, but it also reminded him of the worst night of his life. Anna did not want it either. In the end, we donated it to a local museum. The museum restored the wood, but left the deep scratches along the edges. The hidden drawer remains open behind glass. Next to it are copies of Daniel's notebook, the fountain pen, and the brass key. Visitors can listen to part of the cassette recording and read about the case. Most people stand there for only a few minutes. They see an old piece of furniture connected to an old crime. But I see something different. I see Daniel sitting alone and writing, while the people closest to him prepared to betray him. I see Robert driving through the night with the desk in his truck. I see Anna watching from a window as Richard entered her garage. I see Evan waiting for a father who would never come home. And I think about how close the truth came to disappearing. Michael almost threw the desk away. I almost refused to buy it because it was too heavy. I almost ignored the locked drawer. I almost threw away the fountain pen because it did not work. Any one of those decisions could have kept the secret buried forever. Richard might still be remembered as a respected businessman. Claire might still be describing Daniel as a thief who abandoned his family. Evan might still believe he failed his father, and Daniel might still be beneath that concrete foundation without a name. People like to say the truth always comes out. That is not true. The truth does not come out by itself. Sometimes it stays hidden for 20 years. Sometimes it survives only because frightened people protect small pieces of it. A notebook, a photograph, a key, a recording. Sometimes the truth waits inside an old wooden desk covered in dust. And sometimes all it needs is one person to notice that a drawer is deeper than it should be.